Project Ascension, Chapter 11, by Darthlink22 and The Myth. Twilight Sparkle was terrified beyond belief. Her son, Spike, was now in the clutches of that rotten mare and her sick superior. She sat on her haunches as he looked down at the floor, where a small pond of tears was forming as it was being released from her eyes like a waterfall of cascading running water. Cadence, at the request of her husband, held on to Twilight and stroked her mane, trying to calm the poor mare down. The guards, who informed Twilight of what had occurred, looked at her with sorrow and pity in their eyes. Shining, who had been healed thanks to the medics of the infirmary, approached his sister and placed a hoof under her chin, raising it up to meet her eyes. Her eyes were bloodshot, thanks to the excess of crying she had done. Shining remembering only a few occasions in life where she was broken like this. He bit his lower lip as he cursed himself, recalling that one of those moments was his fault, making her cry on his wedding day by siding with an impostor. He blinked slowly and brought his foreleg over her neck, holding her in place as she sobbed into his shoulder. Twilight, we'll get him back. I promise. We'll get Spike back. He chanted to her multiple times, hoping against all hope it was working, if only for a second. Cadence decided to join in the hug and use her magic to speed up Twilight's healing, hoping with the pain eradicated she would feel better. Twilight, Shining and his guards will get Spike back. We're also going to get Scootaloo and Rainbow back. I promise you! She exclaimed softly as she nuzzled her little sister-in-law affectionately. She always loved Twilight like a little sister since her days as her foal-sitter, and she could not bear seeing her in this state. Twilight sniffed as she gave a nod in her brother's shoulder, with Shining patting her head softly and looking down sadly at his little sister. Just as he let go of her, the doors of the infirmary burst open, and Twilight's friends came running in to comfort their friend. Even though Pinky's mane was still fluffy, there was some smile on her face as she held her friend close in a tight hug, the others joining in.
Oh my gosh, Twilight! Those meanies took Spike! Oh, if I was there, I would have salted them yellow with my can so much that...
Applejack placed a hoof over her mouth, achieving immediate silence in the room. We'll get you out there, Pinky, she said solemnly, her eyes looking down at their distressed friend. As more and more comforting words entered her ears, Twilight's crying started to cease, and the blur in her eyes was beginning to clear up too. She gazed at the puddle of tears underneath her. She could see a helpless Spike being dragged away by a laughing Yellow. She blinked rapidly and clenched her teeth as she began to scowl.
They'll pay for this,
she whispered softly, as she gently pushed her friends away and got into her hooves. A newfound source of energy was at her disposal. She raised her head slowly, with fire in her eyes. The rage edged down to her face. Twilight, don't worry, Shining said. We'll get him back. I'll get him back, Twilight said angrily. Scootaloo and Rainbow, too. They're going to pay.
Twilight,
Cadence said quickly. You should really stay here and rest. No! Twilight said. She exploded, her mane tail bursting out of the flames. Every pony flinched as she took a step back and saw the most powerful unicorn in Equestria enraged. The fire on her body quickly calmed, but the fire in her eyes did not. I'll get them, and I'll make sure nothing happens to my son, she said as she made her way back to the door. Before she could open it, though, she felt a firm hoof on her shoulder which belonged to Applejack. She turned to see her friend looking at her with green eyes that displayed concern.
Twilight, I understand you need to find your boy, but slow your hooves for a minute. I'll think this through. You don't have to do it alone. We're here for you, Twilight,
she said as she gently pulled Twilight away from the door and held her in a secured hug. Applejack could understand what Twilight had to be feeling at the moment, as she was thinking of what she would have done if somebody had folded that apple bloom and did horrible things to her. She thought that Twilight felt even worse than she could feel, because Spike was Twilight's son. She frowned slightly when she let go of Twilight, and a thought crossed her mind. Why the heck did they even want Spike anyway? Applejack wondered out loud. I almost got him back at the other lab, too. Faced with this question, Twilight's natural inquisitive nature began to override her terror and anger, but not completely.
I've been wondering that as well. They took scales from him for their projects instead of anything from me.
Yellow sounded like she was about to tell us something before Blue busted in.
And didn't those two call him a doll back in the lab? Pinky said. What was that about?
I don't know, Twilight admitted, but I think it's time I sat down and had a talk with Celestia, she said calmly as she exited through the door. Her friends, brother, and Folsom are following suit. Rainbow Dash walked cautiously through the seemingly endless darkened corridor, barely being able to see her new companions in the dim candlelight. Every single hoofstep echoed through the halls of the place, sending chills down their spines. The further they retreated, the more she started to feel like she was being watched, like she was walking right into a trap, which was an understandable feeling. Little Light clenched himself on his older brother's leg as they traveled into the pitch black beyond. Rainbow could see the sheer fear in his eyes, even though he tried to hide it. The corridor looked as if they hadn't been in that habitat in years. Webs hung from the ceiling, and the walls of the place had turned to a dull shade of gray. No windows. That was the first thing she noticed. Not a single one. It made her feel so trapped, even though she could vaguely hear the rain assaulting the ancient cobblestone and walls in the laboratory. You know, since you were already caged, there was little point in me letting you out, Blaze noted. You can relax. Blaze whispered, his murmurs echoing off in the dark. I'm not laying my guard down, the mayor snapped. Not until we're all back at the palace. Life shifted. Is Blaze going to get in trouble? He asked. He's not a bad pony. Kid, Rainbow Dash said tensely, before she caught herself. I don't know. But Princess Celestia is a kind ruler. She'll probably let your brother off lightly if he keeps helping me. I have no intention of fighting Celestia as long as Light is safe, the stallion said bluntly. Celestia can lock me up and throw away the key for all I care. But they won't, will they? Light asked, panicked at the thought of losing his brother. Blaze just placed a hoof down on his little brother's head and rolled up his hair. When the hoof was removed, Light looked up at his brother's face and saw a genuine smile. I'll be fine, Light, he said softly to him as he laid his head down to eye level with his brother. You can always trust me. Got it memorized? He said as he smiled with Light, nodding his head, but without a smile. Blaze felt a tap on his shoulder and looked up to see Rainbow Dash looking down sternly at him. What? He asked bluntly, with her pointing to a cell door. Would you do the honors? She asked as she stood to one side to give him room to move. Blaze walked up to the door, reaching for the key and pushing it into the lock. He turned the key and the cell door unlocked. With a quick glance to either side to ensure he wasn't being watched, he opened the door. When the cell door was open, Rainbow flew in quickly and scooped up Scootaloo in a bone-crushing hug and nuzzled her. Scootaloo was confused at first, but when she realized that her attacker was actually Rainbow holding her, she returned the hug with as much strength as she could muster. She looked up at Rainbow, who looked back at her with caring eyes and stroked her head gently. Are you okay? She asked Scootaloo, who nodded to give her an answer. She looked behind Rainbow to see Blaze and a new colt at his side. Blaze walked up to Scootaloo and began the process of unlocking her from her shackles. Blaze? What's going on? She asked as she looked to Rainbow and back at Blaze, who simply waved a hoof at her as he grinned. Blaze just snoring as he undid the final lock on Scootaloo. It's a long story, Scootaloo. One I'm sure you'll tell all your friends when you're out of here, he remarked as he saw the look of Scootaloo's eyes shining with a glimmer of hope. Does that mean? Rainbow nodded. Scootaloo smiled wildly at this. She felt the shackles fall from her legs and noticed the bruising forming. Don't worry, Scoots. We'll have that look back when we're at the palace, Rainbow answered her, as she saw Scootaloo wincing slightly as she rubbed her hooves against her legs to get rid of the itch that came from wearing them. She then felt an itch forming at the base of her wounds, and then safely raised the hoof to scratch them. I don't think you should try to scratch that, Light told Scootaloo, who looked back at him curiously for the distance. Who are you? Blaze cut his little brother off before he could answer. We can save the introductions for later, when we get out of here. Black and Blowwing probably already know we're gone. Let's get moving. Rainbow Dash nodded. Good idea, she said, lowering herself. Come on, kiddo, on my back. Scootaloo did as she was told, finding a comfortable spot on the mare's back. Light did the same to Blaze, knowing what was going to happen. Let's go! And with that, the two older Pegasi lifted themselves in the air and flew off. The pair navigated the hallways with precision, going as fast as they could without making it difficult for their passengers to hold on. Finally, they found an exit. As soon as they were outside, they flew into the sky, heading toward the palace. Meanwhile, running in the streets to avoid detection, Yellow returned to the base carrying an unconscious Spike. So, for those of you at home who are keeping score, Scootaloo is back to being free. Spike is now kidnapped. Who's going to get kidnapped next? Celestia was not having the best of days. But it was bad enough that one criminal had broken into the palace and freed another criminal, all on the wants of the captain of the guard no less, and then kidnapped the son of her favorite student. But now, of all times, Twilight had burst into the chambers, demanding to know something that Celestia hoped she would not ask for another year. The truth about her son. She sighed heavily at the 7 expectant faces staring at her, while waiting an answer. I'm afraid Yellow wasn't lying, my most faithful student, she said sadly. I have been keeping something from you, but it's been to protect you, not harm you. Twilight cocked her head, confused. Protect me? From what? From yourself, the unicorn said simply. And for those who would exploit you. I don't understand. Celestia was silent for a moment. Do you know what was different about your tests, as opposed to the others I had given? Yes, you used a real egg instead of a fake one. Celestia shook her head and grimaced. No, Twilight. The truth is, there was no difference. A stunned silence hung in the air. What? Twilight, that egg wasn't real. It was a doll egg, just like every pony gets when they perform the test. Celestia answered her student, who was stunned by this fact, and every other pony in the room was confused by this. I don't understand, Applejack said as she shook her head slightly. That don't make any sense at all. Celestia walked up and stood by her student, standing before her with Twilight looking up at the princess. Haven't you noticed how different Spike is from other dragons? How he lacked wings and had such an unusual scale color? How he seemed to be take living among ponies so well? How he never just seemed to have any of a dragon's documented natural instincts? Twilight was silent. She indeed wondered all those things. You didn't hatch Spike. You gave life to him. He didn't start life as an egg. He started it as stitches, fabric, and fluff. But on that day, your great burst of magic gave you what you wanted the most at that very moment. It pulled life where there was none before. It was then I realized the truth. She paused for a moment, closing her eyes and letting out her breath slowly. You were born with a magic so powerful that only 1 in a million unicorns have. Star Swirl the Bearded also had a strong magic, just like you, Twilight, and the other ponies before him. Before Mayan's sister and I took the roles of raising the sun and moon, unicorns had this duty, as I'm sure you remember. She said she was recalling to the heart-warming Eve tale. When I saw your magic becoming unstable, performing spells that even adult ponies have difficulty performing, I took it upon myself to teach you how to control your powers that you have vested in you. What shocked me even more was the fact that instead of receiving a doll for graduating, a live baby dragon was there. A pure, innocent baby dragon that was brought into this world by you, my most faithful student. She said as he nuzzled her affectionately, seeing the stress in her student's eyes. Twilight's lips quivered at the touch of Celestia's head brushing up against her. But that means Spike's. So that means Spike really is Twilight's son! Everybody turned their head to Pinkie, as he smiled slightly at the news she had just heard from the princess. Because if that story is true, then that means Twilight really did give birth to Spike. But that also means that Twilight is like the youngest mommy ever! She remarked to herself out loud, but she noticed that others looking at her blankly. What? I'm just saying Spike really is Twilight's boy. Verity shook her head. I think it's a little more complicated than that, Pinkie, she said, still trying to digest this information for the princess. Princess, I think you know it was impossible for Twilight to just will a doll to life, and you should tell us the truth, please. Shiny told the princess, but was met with a slight cold look from Twilight. Realizing his wording, he looked away in shame. I'm sorry. Magic is a peculiar thing, Celestia noted. It's connected through the heart of every living being. The heart is formed for the nurturing of feelings such as friendship and love. That's what allowed Spike to be born. A part of Twilight's heart and soul resides in him. Magic gave him shape and breath, and now he came. He looked like a dragon, but had the heart of a pony. Some say he is merely a construct of magic, but the moment I laid my eyes on him, I saw the genuine signs of life flowing through him. He's as real as you are, Twilight. Twilight started blinking uncontrollable, processing this revelation that was given to her by her teacher. So, me adopting him was unnecessary? Twilight uttered, her body shaking at the implications. Celestia shook her head as he draped her wing comfortably over Twilight. I never submitted those papers, Twilight. You've been on record as Spike's mother from the day he was born. Don't you find it odd I let you raise a child at such a young age? You told me it was to teach me responsibility, Twilight said. Before trailing off as she looked up at Celestia's face, whose face softened in a small smile formed with her eyelids half closed. And it was. However, it was also because he was your flesh and blood, your responsibility, she said as she let go of her student. Twilight stood there in silence at all of this new information. She then looked up to Celestia with determination in her brimming in her eyes. If you excuse me, Princess, I need to go get my son back for those sick ponies, she said firmly. Celestia smiled as she nodded her head. Shining? Twilight called to her brother, and he approached both of them slowly. I want you to go with Twilight to find Spike, Celestia ordered, to which Shining Armor responded with a sharp salute. I will, Your Majesty, he said to her. But Princess, what about Rainbow and Scootaloo? His answer was merely a small smile, which confused the pony's presence until Celestia glanced over at the balcony. I believe that problem has solved itself, she said plainly, as two ponies came flying fast into the throne room. Both ponies landed roughly at the opposite side of the room, each of them carrying a foal on their back. Rainbow! As soon as she heard her name, she turned to the others, who came running to greet their friend. Just before they could grab her in a group hug, she raised her hoof to stop to him and pointed to Scootaloo on her back. Don't want to hurt her now, do we? The ponies in the room stayed silent as they saw Scootaloo, a horn on her head and slightly bigger wings. Fluttershy immediately flew to her and checked her legs as she held her gently in place. Oh dear, we need to get this bandage up, she said, continuing to check Scootaloo for more injuries. The other ponies came to her and huddled her as they barraged her with questions. You all right there, Sugar Cube? We were so worried. What did those ruffians do to you, you poor thing? It does mean he's hurt you bad. Wait until they taste my cannon. Twilight, however, was staring at the other pony that came with Rainbow with narrowed eyes. Blaze was standing there, brother on his back, in a room he thought he would never see in his life. The feeling of awe started to turn to outward awkwardness when Twilight looked down with contempt in her eyes. He said, gently setting his brother down next to him. I'm new. Hi, he said, waving a hoof at her. You! Twilight spat as she realized who he was. Every pony's attention turned to Blaze, who was trying to remain calm in this definitely unfriendly situation. He knew he was going to pay for his actions, helping with the kidnapping and the experimentation on a filly they cared about. He just sighed as he realized he was in trouble no matter what he said or did now, so he decided to at least have a little bit more fun. Miss me? He asked casually. Blaze was very fortunate that Celestia was more powerful than Twilight, because the lavender unicorn looked down with pure rage in her eyes. Luckily, her mentor held her in midair with her magic, levitating the unicorn and thrashing in the air with rage. You took Spike! She shouted to Blaze. You took my son, you little... Blaze looked at her in confusion. Who? He began, but Rainbow saw Claire quickly, but caused him to rethink his words. Dragon? He corrected himself, not wanting to have another fight with the unicorn again. Where is he? Twilight demanded, still suspended in the air, but flailing angrily. Blaze shook his head vigorously. I don't know. I stood back at Bloodwing's lab. As soon as we got Scootaloo, we left, he said. Celestia dropped her magic and released Twilight, as he began to march up to him. Light stood in front of her, but this did not stop her one bit. At that point, Scootaloo decided to stand in front of Blaze and intervene. Please, Twilight, he helped us escape. This seemed to mollify the unicorn a bit, though he still looked ready and willing to kill him at the first opportunity. Well, why would Bloodwing want Spike? Blaze shifted. Well, I don't know if the princess told you, but he was created by me. I know. Oh, well, he's made up of your magic, and you're the most powerful unicorn alive today. That would be useful if he could. Twilight froze. Her eyes went wide as she came obvious to the conclusion. If he could break him down. Spike groaned as his eyes opened. All he saw was a blurry face that slowly came into focus, one with a malicious smile. He gasped and tried backing away from the foul presence, but he couldn't budge one bit. He started to breathe frantically in panic, his eyes desperately scanning the room. He noticed Yellow behind Bloodwing, who was wearing a triumphant grin on her eyes as he looked down at the frail form of Spike before her. Well, well. Bloodwing grinned as he stood up and went to Yellow, patting her on the head as though she was a dog who did her master proud. It's a shame your subject tend to senile goats, but it looks like I just got myself a brand new doll to tinker with. He cooed to Yellow. Suddenly, he turned his head to Spike, looking down at him with crazed eyes for a moment, before looking up and twisting his head, as though it was pointing into another room. Spike then felt his body being lifted up by magic, and looked behind him to see Black carrying him. He started floating in the air, trying to free himself from the criminal's hold. Let me down, you! I have rights, you! Suddenly, Spike felt immense pain as Black dropped him to the floor and drove his hoof to the top of his scaly head. Spike let out a cry of agony and pain. He could feel the blood seeping from his injury. He felt himself lifted again, his vision now blurred from the tears he was shedding. Dolls have no rights. Black told him with a deadpan expression as he followed Bloodwing and Yellow to the next room, Spike right behind him in a cloud of magic. Spike's lips quivered as he shed more tears from the attack. He closed his eyes and clenched his teeth, dreading what they had in store for him. Mom, help me.